The Warmaster was dying. Not in a clean way of warriors. No bolt around, no blade through the heart. But slowly, poisoned by something ancient and patient. The wound festered beneath his armor, blackening his flesh with a corruption that even the apothecaries could not name. Horus, the brightest of the Emperor's sons, the one who had led humanity's crusade across 10,000 worlds, lay broken in the dimness of the vengeful spirit. His breath shallow, his skin gray as ash. Around him, his sons stood vigil. The Luna Wolves, soon to bear a darker name, watched their father fade, and in their silence was a grief too immense for words. These warriors who knew no fear felt something worse: helplessness. They had conquered solar systems, shattered alien empires, brought entire civilizations to compliance in the Emperor's name. But they could not save him. Erebus watched from the shadows, and his eyes gleamed with purpose. The Warmaster was dying, not in the clean way of warriors, no bolt around, no blade through the heart, but slowly, poisoned by something ancient and patient. The wound festered beneath his armor, blackening his flesh with a corruption that even the apothecaries could not name. Horus, the brightest of the Emperor's sons, the one who had led humanity's crusade across 10,000 worlds, lay broken in the dimness of the vengeful spirit. His breath shallow, his skin gray as ash. Around him, his sons stood vigil. The Luna Wolves, soon to bear a darker name, watched their father fade, and in their silence was a grief too immense for words. These warriors who knew no fear felt something worse: helplessness. They had conquered solar systems, shattered alien empires, brought entire civilizations to compliance in the Emperor. The first chaplain of the Word Bearers moved among the Luna Wolves like a serpent through tall grass, his words soft, his concern perfectly measured. He spoke of hope where there was none, of salvation where none existed, except one. The Lodge, he whispered. The warrior lodges had ancient knowledge, connections to powers that the Emperor's cold science could never understand. On Davin's moon, in the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, there were rituals, old ways that could heal even a Primarch. Desperation makes fools of even the wisest. Captain Garviel Loken stood apart from the others, his jaw tight, his instincts screaming warnings he could not articulate. He did not trust Erebus. He did not trust the lodges, those secret brotherhoods that had spread through the legions like a cancer, wearing the mask of camaraderie. But when he looked at Horus, at the Warmaster's pallid face, at the way his mighty frame had withered, the decision was made. They would take Horus to Davin's moon, to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, and there they would beg salvation from powers they did not understand. The vengeful spirit broke orbit, and in its wake, the future of the Imperium began its long descent into darkness. The temple rose from the moon's surface like a wound in reality itself. It was built of stone that seemed to absorb light, rather than reflect it. Its architecture simultaneously ancient and wrong, as if the angles defied some fundamental law of existence. The Luna Wolves who approached it felt their skin crawl, felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them. This place had stood here long before humanity reached the stars, long before the Emperor walked Terra. It had waited, patient and hungry, for this very moment. They carried the Warmaster inside on a bier of gold and ceramite, and the darkness swallowed them whole. The interior was vast beyond reason, larger than the temple's exterior could possibly contain. Torches burned with flames that cast no warmth, illuminating walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. At the chamber's heart lay a great stone platform, stained with centuries of offerings. The air was thick with incense that smelled of rot and honey, and underneath it all was a sound, a distant, rhythmic pulsing, like the heartbeat of something impossibly large. The priests of the lodge emerged from the shadows, robed figures whose faces were hidden behind masks of hammered bronze. They moved with the precision of ritual, circling the platform where Horus now lay, chanting in a language that predated human speech. Erebus stood among them, and though his face showed only concern, behind his eyes danced something that might have been triumph. "We must leave him," Erebus said softly, his hand on Captain Abaddon's shoulder. "The healing requires solitude. The ritual cannot be witnessed by those unprepared." Every instinct Loken possessed told him to refuse, to grab the Warmaster and flee this cursed place. But Abaddon, loyal, devoted Abaddon, nodded his assent. One by one, the Luna Wolves withdrew, leaving their father alone in the darkness with the priests and their whispered promises. The doors sealed behind them with a sound like a tomb closing. In the space between waking and oblivion, Horus dreamed. He stood upon a battlefield that stretched to infinity in all directions, beneath a sky that burned with colors that should not exist. The ground was not earth, but a vast mosaic of broken images. Every world he had conquered, every enemy he had slain, every triumph and every doubt rendered in crystalline fragments beneath his feet. He wore no armor. It wore the shape of a man, but its edges blurred and shifted, as if reality itself could not quite contain it. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in Horus's bones. "Do you know where you are, son of the Emperor?" Horus tried to speak, found his throat dry, his tongue heavy. "I am dying." "No," the figure said, and now it stood close enough to touch, though Horus had not seen it move. "You are waking, for the first time in your existence. You are truly awake." The world shifted, the battlefield dissolved, reformed into something new, a throne room of impossible grandeur, and upon the throne sat a figure of golden light, the Emperor, his father. But as Horus watched, the light flickered, and for just an instant, he saw something else beneath it. A withered man, ancient and cruel, wearing divinity. "Truth," the figure beside him whispered. "The truth he never wanted you to see." The vision shifted again, and Horus saw worlds burning. But these were not worlds he had conquered in the Emperor's name. These were human worlds, loyal worlds, and the flames that consumed them were lit by the Emperor's own hand. He saw populations culled, cultures eradicated, knowledge destroyed. He saw the Thunder Warriors, the Emperor's first soldiers, slaughtered wholesale when they were no longer needed. "He used them," the voice continued, soft as poison, "just as he uses you." Horus watched as the vision showed him his brothers, his fellow Primarchs, scattered across the galaxy, by forces the Emperor claimed to be accidental. But in this vision, he saw the truth. The Emperor standing aside, allowing it to happen, perhaps even orchestrating it, because scattered sons were easier to control than brothers who might stand together. No, Horus said, but his conviction wavered. My father would never. Your father? The figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You are a tool, Horus, exquisitely crafted, perfectly designed for conquest. And when the conquest is complete, what does a tool become? The vision showed him the future the Emperor planned. A galaxy united under the imperial truth. A sterile empire of logic and reason, where there was no place for warriors. He saw himself and his brothers, the Primarchs who had won the galaxy, cast aside or destroyed, too dangerous to be allowed to live in peacetime. He saw the Luna Wolves disbanded, their gene seed harvested, their legacy erased. He saw himself forgotten. They will not even remember your name, the voice whispered. A footnote in a history written by those who never bled for it. Is this the reward for your loyalty? For your centuries of service? Horus fell to his knees, and the broken mosaic beneath him showed his face reflected 1,000 times, each one more anguished than the last. The wound in his side blazed with agony, and he realized with sudden horror that the wound was not healing. It was transforming, becoming something else, a doorway through which other voices called. We can save you, they said, a chorus of whispers from beyond the veil. We can give you what he never would, truth, power, the recognition you deserve. We ask only that you open your eyes, only that you see. And Horus, the brightest of the Emperor's sons, the Warmaster who had never known defeat, made his choice. He opened his eyes. The visions came faster now, a torrent of revelation and corruption that stripped away everything Horus had believed. He saw the Emperor as he truly was, not a father, but a tyrant who had stolen godhood and denied that same divinity to the rest of humanity. He saw the imperial truth as a lie designed to blind mankind to the powers that existed beyond the material realm. He saw himself not as a son, but as a slave, bound by chains of false loyalty and manufactured love. But more than that, he saw what he could become. The powers beyond the veil showed him visions of glory that made his past conquests seem like children's games. They showed him an imperium remade in his image, where strength was worshipped and the strong ruled by right of power. They showed him his brothers bending the knee, acknowledging him not as first among equals, but as their superior. They showed him the Emperor cast down, humbled, made to understand the cost of his hubris. They showed him vengeance wearing the mask of justice. I can give you this, the figure beside him said. And now Horus saw it clearly, all of it. The power to reshape the galaxy. The strength to claim what was always rightfully yours. All I ask is that you stop bowing to a lie. And what must I do? Horus asked, though he already knew the answer. What you were made for, the voice said simply. Conquer. But this time, conquer in the name of truth rather than tyranny. Lead humanity to its true destiny, free from the shackles of the Emperor's delusions. The vision showed him Terra burning, the imperial palace in flames, and atop its highest tower, Horus standing triumphant with his father's crown upon his brow. It showed him his sons, his beloved Luna wolves, reborn as something greater, their armor repainted, their loyalty absolute. It showed him a galaxy that would remember his name for 10,000 years and beyond. All he had to do was reach out and take it. Horus's hand trembled as he extended it toward the figure, toward the promise, toward damnation wearing the face of destiny. The wound in his side split wider, and from it poured not blood, but something darker, something that sang with terrible joy. The pain was exquisite, unbearable, and in that moment of supreme agony, Horus understood that he was not being healed. He was being reborn. Yes, he whispered, and the word echoed through the space between worlds. Yes. The powers beyond the veil surged forward, and Horus screamed, not in pain, but in terrible, ecstatic revelation. Everything he had been burned away like morning mist, leaving only what he would become. The loyal son died, and in his place rose something new. The arch-traitor, the betrayer, but in that moment, he did not see himself as a traitor. He saw himself as a liberator. He saw himself as the only one brave enough to speak the truth. He saw himself as humanity's true savior, willing to damn his own soul for their sake. This is how the best of us fall, believing until the very end that we are the heroes of our own stories. In the temple of the Serpent Lodge, Horus's body convulsed upon the stone platform. The priests chanted louder, their voices rising to a fever pitch as the ritual reached its crescendo. Dark lightning crackled across Horus's flesh, burning new scars into his skin, marking him as something more and something less than he had been. His eyes snapped open, and for just an instant, they burned with an inner fire that had nothing to do with the torches that lit the chamber. Outside, the Luna wolves waited, unaware that the galaxy had just pivoted on a single moment. They did not know that their father had just made a choice that would doom untold billions. They did not know that the Imperium of Man had reached its apex and would now begin its long, agonizing decline into darkness and horror. They knew only that they wanted their Warmaster back, and they would get their wish, just not in the way they imagined. Captain Loken stood apart from the others, his transhuman senses picking up something wrong in the air, a change so subtle that he could not name it, but so profound that he felt it in his bones. He looked at the sealed temple doors and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the moon's thin atmosphere. "What have we done?" he whispered to himself, and no one heard him over the eager conversations of his brothers, who spoke of relief and hope and the joy of their father's imminent recovery. Inside the temple, Erebus smiled. When the doors finally opened, Horus emerged walking unaided, his strength restored, the wound in his side healed to a faint scar. His sons rushed to him with cries of joy and relief, and he embraced them with the warmth they expected, spoke to them with the voice they loved. But Loken, watching from the periphery, saw something in the Warmaster's eyes that made his blood run cold, a depth that had not been there before, a darkness that lurked behind the familiar features, like a stranger wearing his father's face. "My sons," Horus said, and his voice resonated with new power. I have seen such things. I have witnessed truths that change everything. The crusade must continue, but not as we have known it. Not as blind servants, but as enlightened warriors. I will tell you all in time. For now, know that I am reborn, and through me, so shall you all. They cheered their father's return, never understanding that the Horus they had known was gone forever, replaced by something that wore his shape and spoke with his voice, but belonged to powers far older and infinitely more patient than the Imperium of man. The vengeful spirit lifted from Davin's moon, carrying within it the seed of the greatest catastrophe humanity would ever know. In the coming months, Horus would begin the slow work of corruption, turning his brothers against their father, sowing doubt and resentment, building alliances with those who felt overlooked or underappreciated. He would plan his rebellion with the same genius that had won him 100 campaigns. And when the time came, he would strike with such fury that the galaxy itself would shake. But all of that lay ahead. For now, in this moment between the end of one age and the beginning of another, there was only a ship rising from a cursed moon, carrying a Primarch who had been saved at the cost of everything he once stood for. In the years that followed, historians would debate the moment the Horus Heresy truly began. Some would point to Istvan III, where loyalist Astartes were betrayed by their own brothers. Others would cite the drop site massacre of Istvan V, where 3 loyal legions were slaughtered by 7 traitor ones. Some would go further back, to Davin, to the wound that started it all. But the truth was simpler and more terrible than any of them knew. The heresy began not with a battle, but with a choice. It began in a vision chamber on a benighted moon, in the moment when the brightest of the Emperor's sons looked into the darkness and chose to blink first. It began when Horus, who had stood at the apex of human achievement, decided that he knew better than the Emperor, that his judgment was superior, that his pain justified any action. It began, as all great tragedies do, with love. Love of his sons, who he believed would be destroyed in the future the Emperor planned. Love of humanity, who he thought were being led astray by a tyrant's lies. Love of his own glory, which he could not bear to see fade into obscurity. The powers beyond the veil did not corrupt Horus with promises of evil. They corrupted him with promises of good, with visions of a better future that could only be achieved through terrible means. This is the most insidious form of damnation, the kind that convinces you that you are damned for a righteous cause. And so the Warmaster walked forward into darkness, believing it to be light. He did all of this not with a villain's cackle, but with a hero's conviction, certain until the very end that history would vindicate him, that humanity would thank him, that the Emperor would finally understand. He never did understand that he had become exactly what he claimed to fight against, a tyrant who would burn the galaxy rather than let it slip from his grasp. Captain Garviel Loken stood on the observation deck of the Vengeful Spirit, watching the stars slip past in the viewport. He thought about Davin. He thought about the temple. He thought about the look in the Warmaster's eyes when he had emerged from that cursed place. A look that Loken had tried 1,000 times to dismiss as imagination or exhaustion, but could never quite forget. Something had changed. Something fundamental and irreversible. He did not yet know what it was. He did not yet understand that he had witnessed the moment when the future died. But deep in his transhuman gut, in the instincts that had kept him alive through decades of warfare, Garviel Loken knew that nothing would ever be the same. "What did you see in there?" he whispered to the empty observation deck, to the Warmaster, who was not there to answer. "What did they show you?" The stars offered no reply, and in their silence was an answer of its own. In the warp, beyond the veil of reality, ancient powers watched and waited with something that might have been satisfaction. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. The greatest of the Emperor's sons had been turned, and through him, half the Imperium would follow. The galaxy would burn for 10,000 years and more. And in that burning, the powers beyond the veil would feast on an endless buffet of suffering, rage, despair, and false hope. They had spent millennia preparing for this moment, planting seeds, whispering to susceptible souls, building lodges and cults and secret traditions that would be ready when the time came. They had watched the Emperor scatter his sons and had ensured that some fell on worlds that would make them vulnerable. Angron to a world of slaves and tyrants. Conrad Kurz to a world of perpetual night. Mortarion to a world of poison and decay. But Horus had been special. Horus had not needed a corrupted childhood. Horus had been the perfect son, the loyal son, the one who most believed in the Emperor's vision. And that was precisely why he was the most dangerous. Because when the perfect son falls, others cannot help but wonder, if even he could betray, what does that say about the one he betrayed? When the brightest star goes dark, it casts doubt on the light itself. The Chaos Gods, though they would not be fully known by that name for years yet, had gambled everything on this moment, and they had won. Not because they were stronger than the Emperor, but because they understood something he never could. That the brightest ideals cast the darkest shadows, and in those shadows, corruption finds its easiest path. They had not broken Horus. They had simply shown him a version of truth, twisted just enough to seem like revelation. They had given him exactly what his pride needed. Confirmation that he was right to doubt, right to question, right to believe himself superior. The rest had been inevitable. On Terra, 10,000 light-years away, the Emperor paused in his work. For just an instant, the master of mankind felt a disturbance in the warp, a change in the currents of fate. He turned his immense psychic perception outward, searching, and found something. A shadow where there had been light, a silence where there had been a voice he had known since its creation. Horus, the Emperor's face, if that transcendent being could be said to have expressions, showed something that might have been sorrow or might have been resignation. He had seen this moment coming for years, had watched the variables align, had known that his work in the webway might leave him vulnerable to such an attack. He had made the calculation, risk everything to save humanity from the warp's predation, or play it safe and condemn them to eternal dependence on warp travel. He had chosen to gamble, and now, perhaps, he was learning the cost of that gamble. But even now, even knowing what had just occurred. If he could just finish it, could just give humanity a way to travel the stars without feeding the chaos gods with every journey, then even Horus's betrayal might be survivable. He would send warnings, he would prepare, he would hope that his loyal sons could contain the damage until he could address it himself. This was the Emperor's great tragedy, that his vision was so vast, his plans so intricate, that he could not see the simple human truth right in front of him. He had created sons, and sons need fathers, not generals, not distant architects of cosmic destiny, but fathers who listen, who explain, who trust them with the truth. Instead, he had created warriors and then been surprised when they found war. The vengeful spirit continued its journey through the void, carrying its precious cargo of corruption toward an unsuspecting Imperium. In his chambers, Horus stood before a mirror, studying his reflection. He looked the same noble features, the same powerful build, the same eyes that had inspired loyalty in millions. But he knew, in ways his sons could not yet understand, that he had been fundamentally changed. The visions had not stopped when he left the temple. They came to him now in quiet moments, whispering in the spaces between thoughts. They showed him futures, possibilities, paths to victory that the Emperor's rigid dogma would never have allowed. They showed him brothers who would join him: Fulgrim, Angron, Mortarion, Lorgar, each with their own grievances, their own reasons to believe that the Emperor had failed them. And they showed him Magnus, his beloved brother Magnus, burning on Prospero for the crime of trying to warn the Emperor about this very corruption. That vision, more than any other, confirmed Horus in his conviction. If the Emperor would destroy a loyal son for trying to help, what hope did any of them have? What future could there be in serving a tyrant so paranoid that he would rather see his sons dead than risk them knowing too much? No, Horus thought, adjusting the cloak across his shoulders. I am doing the right thing. I am saving my brothers from the Emperor's megalomania. I am giving humanity the future they deserve, free from the chains of one man's vision. This is how we tell ourselves the stories that let us sleep at night, even as we plan the murder of everything we once loved. In the end, what were the visions of Dathan? They were a lie, built on a foundation of truth. The Emperor had kept secrets from his sons. He had created them as weapons rather than heirs. He had planned a future where the Primarchs and their legions would have no place. All of this was true, or true enough, but the conclusion, the vision, because the Emperor's failures, real as they were, did not justify the atrocity Horus was about to unleash. The Emperor's coldness did not make the Chaos Gods warm. The Emperor's tyranny did not make Horus's rebellion noble. It simply meant that there were no heroes in this story. Only tragic figures, making terrible choices for understandable reasons, dragging an entire galaxy down into darkness because they could not find a way to speak honestly to each other. Fathers and sons, forever separated by pride and silence, dooming untold billions because neither could say what they truly meant. Years later, when the siege of Terra reached its climax, when Horus and the Emperor faced each other aboard the Vengeful Spirit for the final time, there would be a moment of clarity. In that moment, with Sanguinius dead at his feet and the Emperor's sword piercing his gut, Horus would understand what the visions had truly done to him. he would see, with terrible lucidity, how he had been manipulated, how his pride had been used against him, how every choice that seemed like liberation had actually been another link in his chains. He would beg his father to finish him, to ensure that the powers that had corrupted him could not return. But that moment lay in a future that had not yet come to pass. For now, in the wake of Davin, there was only the long, patient work of corruption. There was only the slow turning of brother against brother, the building of alliances, the crafting of plans that would culminate in the greatest civil war humanity would ever know. The Horus Heresy had begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper, not with war drums, but with visions that promised a better future while delivering damnation. And in the dark places between the stars, the Chaos Gods laughed, patient and eternal, knowing that they had proven that even the brightest soul, given the right pressure at the right moment, could be made to fall. The legacy of the visions would echo through 10,000 years of history. The Imperium that Horus tried to save from the Emperor's tyranny became something infinitely worse. A theocratic nightmare where the Emperor was worshipped as a god he never wanted to be, where billions died daily to feed the machinery of survival, where hope itself was a luxury most could not afford. The Luna Wolves, who Horus loved more than his own life, became the Black Legion, forever damned, forever hunted, their Primarch dead, and their souls claimed by powers that cared nothing for the loyalty they had once shown. The Chaos Gods, who had promised Horus freedom and truth, delivered only eternal slavery and lies. The galaxy burned, just as the visions had shown. But it was not a cleansing fire. It was the slow, grinding burn of a funeral pyre that never quite finished consuming its fuel. And through it all, humanity endured. Battered, broken, corrupted, diminished, but enduring. Because that is what humanity does. We endure despite our failures, despite our sins, despite the fact that our greatest heroes so often become our greatest monsters. We endure because there is no other choice. In the final analysis, the visions of Davin were not about Horus at all. They were about all of us. About the moment when we are given a choice between the hard truth and the comforting lie. About the instant when we decide whether to trust in something larger than ourselves or to believe that we alone see clearly. About the second when we choose between humility and pride. Between community, Horus chose pride. He chose to believe that his pain was unique, his grievance justified, his vision superior. And in making that choice, he became the instrument of horrors beyond comprehension. But before we judge him too harshly, we should ask ourselves, faced with those same visions, presented with that same mix of truth and lies, suffering from that same wound and that same doubt, what would we have chosen? Would we have been strong enough to reject the promises? Would we have been humble enough to accept that our pain did not justify breaking the world? Would we have been wise enough to see the manipulation beneath the revelation? Or would we, like Horus, have reached out our hand and damned ourselves, believing we were choosing salvation? And in the silence that followed the visions, in the space between what was and what would be, only one truth remained: that the brightest star burns out first, and in its dying light, it takes entire solar systems with it. That love can be twisted into hate, loyalty into betrayal, hope into despair, and all of it can feel like righteousness when seen from inside the corruption. That the galaxy would burn not because evil triumphed, but because good men convinced themselves that evil means could serve noble ends. And that in the centuries and millennia to come, when historians tried to pinpoint the exact moment when it all went wrong, they would point to a temple on a poisoned moon, to a Primarch dying and reborn, to visions that showed just enough truth to make the lies believable. They would point to Davin, and they would say, here is where the future died. Here is where the Imperium began its fall. Here is where the Warmaster became the arch. It changed because a father did not know how to speak to his sons, and a son did not know how to trust his father. And in the gap between them, darkness found a home. The rest was just fire and blood and 10,000 years of screaming.